Perception of the fixed laws of nature. There are three other subclasses of subjective mental phenomena which must be grouped by themselves, inasmuch as they are governed by a law which does not pertain to the classes mentioned in the preceding chapter, although there are some characteristics which are common to them all. The first of these classes of phenomena is manifested in mathematical prodigies, the second in musical prodigies, and the third pertains to the measurement of time. The important distinction to be observed between the phenomena described in the preceding chapter and those pertaining to mathematics, music, and the measurement of time consists in the fact that in the former everything depends upon objective education, whilst the latter are apparently produced by the exercise of inherent powers of the subjective mind. In order not to be misunderstood, it must be here stated that on all subjects of human knowledge not governed by fixed laws, the subjective mind is dependent for its information upon objective education. In other words, it knows only what has been imparted to it by and through the objective senses or the operations of the objective mind. Thus, its knowledge of the contents of books can only be acquired by objective methods of education. Its wonderful powers of acquiring and assimilating such knowledge are due to its perfect memory of all that has been imparted to it by objective education, aided by its powers of memory and of logical arrangement of the subject matter. Leaving clairvoyance and thought transference out of consideration for the present, the principle may be stated thus. The subjective mind cannot know by intuition the name of persons, or a geographical location, or a fact in human history. But it does know by intuition that 2 and 2 make 4. No one without an objective education can, by the development of the subjective faculties alone, become a great poet, or a great artist, or a great orator, or a great statesman. But he may be a great mathematician, or a great musician, independently of objective education or training, by the development of the subjective faculties alone. Many facts are on record which demonstrate this proposition. Hundreds of instances might be cited showing to what a prodigious extent the mathematical and musical faculties can be developed in persons not only without objective training, but, in some instances, without a brain capable of receiving any considerable objective education. Mathematical prodigies of the character mentioned are numerous. One of the most remarkable was the famous Zera Colburn. The following account of his early career, published when he was yet under 8 years of age, is taken from the Annual Register of 1812, an English publication, and will serve to illustrate the proposition. The attention of the philosophical world has been lately attracted by the most singular phenomenon in the history of human mind that perhaps ever existed. It is the case of a child under 8 years of age who, without any previous knowledge of the common rules of arithmetic, or even of the use and power of the Arabic numerals, and without having given any attention to the subject, possesses, as if by intuition, the singular faculty of solving a great variety of arithmetical questions by the mere operation of the mind, and without the usual assistance of any visible symbol or contrivance. The name of the child is Zera Colburn, who was born at Cabot, a town lying at the head of the Onion River in Vermont, in the United States of America, on the 1st of September, 1804. About 2 years ago, August 1810, although at that time not 6 years of age, he first began to show these wonderful powers of calculation, which have since so much attracted the attention and excited the astonishment of every person who has witnessed his extraordinary abilities. The discovery was made by accident. His father, who had not given him any other instruction other than such as was to be obtained at a small school established in that unfrequented and remote part of the country, and which did not include either writing or ciphering, was much surprised one day to hear him repeating the products of several numbers. Struck with amazement at the circumstance, he proposed a variety of arithmetical questions to him, all of which the child solved with remarkable facility and correctness. The news of the infant prodigy was soon circulated through the neighborhood, and many persons came from distant parts to witness so singular a circumstance. The father, encouraged by the unanimous opinion of all who came to see him, was induced to undertake with this child the tour of the United States. They were everywhere received with the most flattering expressions, and in several towns which they visited, various plans were suggested to educate and bring up the child free from all expense to his family. Yielding, however, to the pressing solicitations of his friends, and urged by the most respectable and powerful recommendations, as well as by a view to his son's more complete education, the father has brought the child to this country, where they arrived on the 12th of May last, and the inhabitants of this metropolis have for the last 3 months had an opportunity of seeing and examining this wonderful phenomenon, and verifying the reports that had been circulated respecting him. Many persons of the first eminence for their knowledge in mathematics, and well known for their philosophical inquiries, have made a point of seeing and conversing with him, and they have all been struck with astonishment at his extraordinary powers. It is correctly true, as stated of him, that he will not only determine with the greatest facility and dispatch the exact number of minutes in any given period of time, but will also solve any question of a similar kind. He will tell the exact product arising from the multiplication of any number consisting of 2, 3, or 4 figures by any other number consisting of the like number of figures, or any number consisting of 6 or 7 places of figures being proposed. He will determine with equal expedition and ease all the factors of which it is composed. This singular faculty consequently extends not only to the raising of powers, but to the extraction of the square and cube roots of the number proposed, and likewise to the means of determining whether it is a prime number, or a number incapable of division by any other number, for which case there does not exist at present any general rule amongst mathematicians. All these, and a variety of other questions connected therewith, are answered by this child with such promptness and accuracy, and in the midst of his juvenile pursuits, as to astonish every person who has visited him. At a meeting of his friends, which was held for the purpose of concerting the best methods of promoting the views of the father, this child undertook and completely succeeded in raising the number 8 progressively up to the 16th power, and in naming the last result, 281,474,976,710,656, he was right in every figure. He was then tried as to the other numbers consisting of one figure, all of which he raised by actual multiplication and not by memory, as high as the 10th power, with so much facility and dispatch that the person appointed to take down the results was obliged to enjoin him not to be so rapid. With respect to the numbers consisting of 2 figures, he would raise some of them to the 6th, 7th, and 8th power, but not always with equal facility, for the larger the products became, the more difficult he found it to proceed. He was asked the square root of 106,929, and before the number could be written down, he immediately answered 327. He was then required to name the cube root of 268,336,125, and with equal facility and promptness, he replied 645. Various other questions of a similar nature, respecting the roots and powers of very high numbers, were proposed by several of the gentlemen present, to all of which he answered in a similar manner. One of the party requested him to name the factors which produced the number 247,483. This he immediately did by mentioning the numbers 941 and 263, which, indeed, are the only two numbers that will produce it, namely 5 times 34,279, 7 times 24,485, 59 times 2,905, 83 times 2,065, 35 times 4,897, 295 times 581, and 413 times 45. He was then asked to give the factors of 36,083, but he immediately replied that it had none, which in fact was the case, as 36,083 is a prime number. Other numbers were indiscriminately proposed to him, and he always succeeded in giving the correct factors, except in the case of prime numbers, which he discovered almost as soon as proposed. One of the gentlemen asked him how many minutes there were in 48 years, and before the question could be written down, he replied 25,228,800, and instantly added that the number of seconds in the same period was 1,513,728,000. Various questions of the like were put to him, and to all of them he answered with equal facility and promptitude, so as to astonish everyone present, and to excite a desire that so extraordinary a faculty should, if possible, be rendered more extensive and useful. It was the wish of the gentlemen present to obtain a knowledge of the method by which the child was enabled to answer with so much facility and correctness the questions thus put to him. But to all their inquiries on the subject, and he was closely examined on this point, he was unable to give them any information. He persistently declared, and every observation that was made seemed to justify this assertion, that he did not know how the answer came into his mind. In the act of multiplying two numbers together, and in the raising of powers, it was evident, not only from the motion of his lips, but also from some singular facts which will be hereafter mentioned, that some operations were going forward in his mind. Yet that operation could not, from the readiness with which the answers were furnished, be at all allied to the usual mode of proceeding with such subjects. And moreover, he is entirely ignorant of the common rules of arithmetic, and cannot perform upon paper a simple sum in multiplication or division. But in the extraction of roots and in mentioning the factors of high numbers, it does not appear that any operation can take place, since he will give the answer immediately or in a very few seconds, where it would require, according to the ordinary method of solution, a very difficult and laborious calculation, and, moreover, the knowledge of a prime number cannot be obtained by any known rule. It must be evident from what has here been stated that the singular faculty which this child possesses is not altogether dependent on his memory. In the multiplication of numbers and the raising of powers, he is doubtless considerably assisted by that remarkable quality of the mind, and in this respect he might be considered as bearing some resemblance, if the difference of age did not prevent the justness of the comparison, to the celebrated Jedediah Buxtor and other persons of similar note. But in the extraction of the roots of numbers, and in determining their factors, if any, it is clear to all those who have witnessed the astonishing quickness and accuracy of this child, that the memory has nothing to do with the process. And in this particular point consists the remarkable difference between the present and all former instances of an apparently similar kind. End of extract. Now, the latter remark above quoted would not apply to the present day, for many parallel cases have been reported within the present decade. It was hoped that the powers of this child would develop by education, and for this purpose he was placed in school and trained in objective methods of mathematical calculation. It was believed that when his mind became mature, he would then be able to impart to others the process by which his calculations were made. But his friends were doomed to disappointment. His powers did not improve by objective training. On the contrary, they deteriorated just in proportion to his efforts in that direction, and his pupils derived no benefit from the extraordinary faculties with which he was endowed. This has been the invariable rule in such cases. A few years ago, a gentleman traveled through this country teaching arithmetic. He was known as the lightning calculator. His powers were, indeed, marvelous. He could add a column of as many numbers as could be written on a sheet of legal cap, by casting an instantaneous glance upon the page. But he succeeded no better as a teacher than thousands of others who could not add a column of numbers without reading every figure by the usual laborious, objective process. He could give no explanation of his powers, other than that he possessed extraordinary quickness of vision. But anyone who is sufficiently acquainted with the elements of optical laws to be aware that in the light of a flash of lightning, a drop of falling rain appears to be suspended motionless in the air, knows that objective vision is not capable of such rapid transition as to enable one to see at a glance each particular figure in a column of 100 numbers. When this is added to the labor of calculating the relation and aggregate values of the numbers, the conclusion is inevitable that such powers are not given to our objective senses, but must be inherent in the human soul, and beyond the range of objective explanation or comprehension. Musical prodigies furnish further illustrations of the principle involved. Of these, the most remarkable is known as Blind Tom. This person was not only blind from birth, but was little above the brute creation in point of objective intelligence, or capacity to receive objective instruction. Yet his musical capacity was prodigious. Almost in his infancy, it was discovered that he could reproduce on the piano any piece of music that he had ever heard. A piece of music, however long or difficult, once heard, seemed to be fixed indelibly in his memory, and usually could be reproduced with a surprising degree of accuracy. His capacity for improvisation was equally great, and a discordant note rarely, if ever, marred the harmony of his measures. These well-known facts of Blind Tom's history furnish complete illustrations, first, of the perfection of subjective memory, and second, of the inherent power of the subjective mind to grasp the laws of harmony of sounds, and that, too, independently of objective education. Music belongs to the realm of the subjective. It is a passion of the human soul, and it may be safely affirmed that all really good music is the direct product of the subjective mind. It is true that there is much so-called music to be heard which is the product of the objective intelligence, but no one can fail to recognize its origin from its hard, mechanical, soulless character and quality. It bears the same relation to the product of the subjective mind that mere rhyme does to the poetry of a Milton. Music is at once the legitimate offspring of the subjective mind and one of the most potent means of inducing the subjective condition. It is a well-known practice of so-called spiritual mediums to have music at their seances for the ostensible purpose of securing the harmonious conditions necessary to ensure successful performance. Their theory is that the music harmonizes the audience, and that by a reflex action the medium is favorably affected. It is probable that such would be the effect to a limited extent, but the greatest effect is direct and positive upon the medium. The East Indian fakirs invariably invoke the aid of music to enable them to enter the subjective state when they are about to give an exhibition of occult power. In fact, the power of music over the subjective mind is practically unlimited. It speaks the universal language of the soul, and is comprehended alike by prince and by peasant. It is the most powerful auxiliary of love, of religion, and of war. It nerves the soldier to deeds of heroism, and soothes his lying moments. It inspires alike the devotee of pleasure and the worshipper of God. But whilst it interprets every human emotion, and embodies the inward feelings of which all other arts can but exhibit the outward effect, its laws are as fixed and immutable as the laws of mathematics. The next subdivision or branch of the subject pertains to the faculty of measuring the lapse of time. This power is inherent in the subjective mind, and in that alone the objective mind per se does not possess it. The only means by which the objective mind can measure time is by the exercise of the physical senses, either in the observation of the motions of the heavenly bodies, or of some other physical object or phenomenon, which objective experience has shown to be a safe criterion upon which to base an estimate. The subjective mind, on the other hand, possesses an inherent power in that direction, independent of objective aids or the exercise of reason. It is possessed by man in common with many of the brute creation. It is strikingly exhibited in dogs, horses, and other domestic animals accustomed to regular hours of employment. A friend of the writer once owned a large plantation in one of the southwestern states, upon which he worked a large number of mules. They were regularly employed on weekdays, but on Sundays they were turned into a corral and allowed to rest. On regular workdays they were tractable and easily handled, but if one was wanted for a Sunday excursion, it was with the greatest difficulty that he could be caught or made to perform any labor whatever. An English gentleman, well known to the writer, relates a curious anecdote of a dog which was raised in his family. After the dog had come to maturity, One of the sons married and set up an establishment about 3 miles from the parental mansion. It was the habit of the family to see that the dog was fed regularly, immediately after each meal, with the scraps from the table. At the home mansion, the Sunday dinner hour was the same as on weekdays, but was just 2 hours earlier than that adopted at the son's establishment. This fact the dog by some means became acquainted with, and he never failed to take advantage of the information. Every Sunday he would wait patiently for the home dinner, and having finished it, he would promptly take his departure and never failed to put in an appearance at the son's house on time for dinner, where he was sure to be welcomed and entertained as an honored guest. On weekdays, the dinner hour at the two houses were the same, and consequently he never made a pilgrimage in search of an extra meal on any day but Sunday. A favorite mastiff in the family of the writer has taken upon himself the regulation of the household affairs. He awakens the family in the morning at a certain hour, and insists upon promptitude in rising. At precisely 12 o'clock he notifies the family that it is time to feed the horse, and will give no one any peace until his friend's wants are supplied. His own meal seems to be a secondary consideration. At 3 o'clock he notifies his mistress that it is time to visit the kitchen and give directions for preparing dinner. It is not because he expects to be fed at that time, for he is never fed until the family have dined 2 hours later. At 9 o'clock he rises from his rug on the library floor and insists upon a visit to the kitchen for a lunch. It is rare that he varies 5 minutes from the regular hours above noted, but is generally within a minute. This power is exhibited in its perfection in hypnotic subjects and in ordinary sleep. It is that faculty which enables one to awake at an appointed hour in the night, when, before going to sleep, he has made a firm resolution to do so. Monsieur Jouffroy, one of the most celebrated philosophers of France, in speaking of this subject, says, "I have this power in perfection, but I notice that I lose it if I depend on anyone calling me. In this latter case, my mind does not take the trouble of reasoning the time or of listening to the clock. But in the former it is necessary that it do so, otherwise the phenomenon is inexplicable. Everyone has made or can make this experiment." Monsieur Jouffroy is doubtless mistaken in supposing that the mind is necessarily employed in watching the clock, for the experiment is just as successful in the absence of any timepiece. Besides, the fact that animals possess the faculty shows that it is an inherent attribute of the subjective mind. It is the lapse of time that is noted by men as well as by animals, and is wholly independent of artificial methods or instruments for marking the divisions of time. Everyone possesses this faculty in a greater or lesser degree, and the subject need not, therefore, be enlarged upon. As before intimated, hypnotic subjects possess in a very remarkable degree the faculty of noting the lapse of time. On this subject, Professor Bernheim says, "If a somnambulist is made to promise during his sleep that he will come back on such and such a day, at such and such an hour, he will almost surely return on the day and at the hour, although he has no remembrance of his promise when he wakes up. I made A say that he would come back to me in 13 days, at 10 o'clock in the morning. He remembered nothing when he waked. On the 13th day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, he appeared, having come 3 kilometers from his house to the hospital. He had been working in the foundries all night, went to bed at 6 in the morning, and woke up at 9 with the idea that he had to come to the hospital to see me. He told me that he had no such idea on the preceding days, and did not know that he had to come to see me. It came into his head just at the time when he ought to carry it out. It is also well known to all hypnotists that subjects in a hypnotic sleep will awaken at any hour prescribed to them by the operator, seldom varying more than 5 minutes from the time set, even when the sleep is prolonged for hours. If the subject is commanded to sleep, say 10 or 15 minutes, he will generally awaken exactly on time. This fact is also universally recognized by those familiar with hypnotic phenomena, and the subject need not be further illustrated. In concluding this chapter, it is impossible to refrain from indulging in a few general observations regarding the conclusions derivable from the peculiar characteristics of the subjective intelligence thus far noted. We have seen that certain phenomena depend for their perfect development upon objective education, and that certain other phenomena are exhibited in perfection independent of objective education. In other words, certain powers are inherent in the subjective intelligence. These powers appear to pertain to the comprehension of the laws of nature. We have seen that, under certain conditions, the subjective mind comprehends by intuition the laws of mathematics. It comprehends the laws of harmony of sounds independently of objective education. By true artists, the laws of the harmony of colors are also perceived intuitively. These facts have been again and again demonstrated. It would seem, therefore, to be a just conclusion that the subjective mind, untrammeled by its objective environment, will be enabled to comprehend all the laws of nature, to perceive, to know all truth, independent of the slow, laborious process of induction. We are so accustomed to boast of the godlike reason with which man is endowed, that the proposition that the subjective mind, the soul of man, is incapable of exercising that function in what we regard as the highest form of reasoning, seems, at first glance, to be a limitation of the intellectual power of the soul, and inconsistent with what we have been accustomed to regard as the highest attributes of human intelligence. But a moment's reflection will develop the fact that this apparent limitation of intellectual power is, in reality, a godlike attribute of mind. God himself cannot reason inductively. Inductive reasoning supposes an inquiry, a search after knowledge, an effort to arrive at correct conclusions regarding something in which we are ignorant. To suppose God to be an inquirer, a seeker after knowledge, by finite processes of reasoning, is a conception of the deity which negatives his omniscience, and measures infinite intelligence by purely finite standards. For our boasted godlike reason is of the earth, earthy. It is the noblest attribute of the finite mind, it is true, but it is essentially finite. It is the outgrowth of our objective existence. It is our safest guide in the walks of earthly life. It is our faithful monitor and guardian in our daily struggle with our physical environment. It is our most reliable auxiliary in our efforts to penetrate the secrets of nature and wrest from her the means of subsistence. but its functions cease with the necessities which called it into existence, for it will no longer be useful when the physical form has perished, and the veil is lifted which hides from mortal eyes that world where all truth is revealed. Then it is that the soul, the subjective mind, will perform its normal functions, untrammeled by the physical form which imprisons it and binds it to the earth, and, in its native realm of truth, unimpeded by the laborious processes of finite reasoning, it will imbibe all truth from its eternal source.